Welcome to our podcast, Living Our Best with Memory Loss. What makes this podcast unique is that three of its hosts, Bob, Denis, and SuAnne, have a memory loss diagnosis. The purpose of this podcast is for people to share their experiences with cognitive decline. It is not to provide medical advice. We are not doctors, and we stress that what might have worked for one person might not work for others. If anything you hear on this program inspires you to explore treatment options, we recommend you do so in consultation with your physician.
Hi, welcome to our podcast, Living Our Best with Memory Loss. If you tuned in last week, we had some wonderful guests with us. They are the authors of this book, The Complete Family Guide to Dementia, Everything You Need to Know to Help Your Parent and Yourself. And they have returned to be with us again this week. The authors are journalist Thomas Harrison and leading geriatric psychiatrist Dr. Brent Forester. They're back again this week for our podcast to discuss one of the most difficult moments a lot of folks face when they're considering putting their loved one, their parent, into a memory loss facility. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. We loved having you on our last episode, so you've agreed to come back, so thank you.
Great to be back.
Our pleasure.
You know, it's interesting, Bob, I got home the other day and Bob was reading the book and he said, boy, this is something that you need to read. And I said, okay, I've read the majority of it. So he said, but did you get to the part about putting your loved one in a facility, somebody that is suffering from a form of memory loss, a dementia diagnosis? And I'm going through that right now with my own mother. And so I sat down and I read it, and it was so helpful to read because, you know, you talk about the different kinds of facilities and what the difference is between them, and having that conversation with somebody you love. It's just the advantages of a memory care facility as opposed to another type of facility. So anyway, just curious, why was that such a big section of the book? Why was it something that you were so passionate about putting in here? I think I know the answer.
Well, you know, most everyone, if they, you know, as the disease progresses, if they live that long, will eventually need a higher level of care. And that's what a memory care facility is. It's a higher level of care for people whose disease is such that they need that. But people don't realize that. And people have a very negative idea of care facilities. They're often very reluctant, even to put someone in a facility, even though that's where they need to be because of the situation they're in. And no one ever feels that way about a hospital. It's like no one says, you know, I feel bad because I put my loved one in a hospital because they have cancer. That's absurd. And yet, that's how we feel. And I think there's several attitudes that people have. They feel like if they put someone in a care facility, they're a failure.
They failed. Yeah, I thought that was interesting that you wrote that. Yeah.
Yeah. And no, I mean, if your loved one is in the hospital, it's not because you were a cancer. It's not because you failed. It's because that's the environment they need to be in. And many people feel like they're giving up on the person. And no, what you're doing is you're delegating a lot of the difficult physical activity, labors of care to someone else who can do that so that you can focus on the higher level emotional needs of the person that is very hard to attend to when you're doing all the physical work. So you're actually giving them a higher level of care and a better life experience and a better quality of life. It's not giving up, it's the opposite. And a lot of people also feel like they're betraying their loved one's wishes because so many times the loved one will say, oh, don't ever put me in one of those places.
Yes. That sounds familiar.
And you hear that all the time, but it's important to remember what people actually mean when they say that. They don't mean, please don't give me the appropriate level of care for my disease. What they mean is, please don't abandon me.
Exactly.
And so it's important to realize that putting someone in a care facility is not abandoning them. It's actually being able to give them more of yourself because you're attending to their emotional needs and their higher level needs that you couldn't before because you were doing all the other work. And so I think it's important to realize that these are facilities that exist for a reason. They provide a lot of things that you can't as a family member, social interaction, mental
Yes.
stimulation of all sorts, and people don't think about it the right way, and they go about it too late, if at all. And this is not the right way to think about it.
Well, I think I think we're looking at it by seeing television stories about what these places are like. And that's the reason why I don't think people like to think about going to these places.
I want to I want to give Brent a chance to talk, but I just want to say a lot of the reason people have these misconceptions is that they don't understand that memory care facilities are often designed in a certain way for the benefit of the person with dementia,
Right.
which means they're often very simple, which means the living spaces are often very small, so they're not confusing, which means the routines are very rigid because that's what makes people feel more at home. And so and they're not necessarily luxurious because that just creates clutter. And so a lot of the things that we would look for in a home or in a hotel or something are luxuries, but those luxuries actually are very negative to people with a memory problem.
It's funny
And
you
so
say that, Tom. Sorry to interrupt, but when I was looking for a place for my mother, I was honestly thinking about myself. And I was looking at it and I was thinking, oh, that's lovely. And oh, that would, and and then a friend of mine said, is that what your mother needs and what she would enjoy? And I thought, oh, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So it's funny that you should say this. It really resonates with me. You're right.
Yeah. Another aspect of these facilities is they have to be locked down. Security is primarily important because
patient.
we wander.
Yes.
And that's a problem. So that heightens the institutionalized sense of the facility having strict lockdowns and having codes at the doors.
Yeah, but when does that progress to that point? Are there other places that you can get into now that will change over time? Does everyone have to be locked down?
Well, it's a feature of a facility designed for folks with dementia in all stages. And I mean, both of my parents spent time in a facility designed for folks with dementia. And I spent a lot of time visiting them. I was well familiar with the small rooms, the limited schedule, the simplistic routines, the highly regimented routines, and the lockdown nature. And I know, for instance, my mother looking over the shoulder of an orderly there to catch the code. She was barely literate, but she could remember four sequential numbers, and she let herself out repeatedly. So,
Little Houdini.
So one thing I wanted to add, Lori and all, to everything Tom and you all have said on the front end, this decision, which is so challenging, and Tom alluded to a number of the reasons why. One of the reasons, or perhaps I would say the experiences that I've had in caring for a lot of patients and their families throughout this process, is that the disease of dementia involves a lot of grief and loss and mourning, and it's not the loss of the person that's passed away. It's well before that. And so part of the decision around moving or not moving into a long-term care facility of some kind, like a memory care facility, is the recognition on some level. Tom mentioned the abandonment, but it's really recognizing the fact that you're losing someone you care about so much. Not to mention the guilt you may feel because of things they said to you earlier in life. One thing that I often will say to families as they're contemplating these decisions, really there are two things. Number one is there's no right or wrong way to approach this in terms of, do I move someone in or not? But no matter what, they have to plan for keeping them safe and trying to manage at as best as possible quality of life. That could mean staying at home and bringing in help. And there are plenty of families who choose to bring in help into the home, and someone will live there until they pass away. The downside to that is it's hard for the loved one, especially if it's a spouse caregiver, to get away. And they often suffer the consequences of still being daily involved with care that can be not only emotionally exhausting, but have disastrous physical consequences. The other thing that families will often say is after they've made the decision and mom or dad or spouse transitions into a memory care facility and is doing well, 99.9% of the time people say, why did I wait so long?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Because they realize it's almost always the right decision.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like you were saying, Lori, you were looking out for yourself in these places. It was what was right for you, not what was right for your mom or dad or partner.
Absolutely. I
Yeah.
was. You're right.
I think it's a very common phenomenon that loved ones who are caregiving will say, well, I know I need to move this person into a facility, but they're just not ready yet. And what that really
who's not
means
ready?
is
Who's not ready?
very often the loved one is more than ready to move in, but it's the family member who isn't ready yet.
Right.
And so, you know, good signals of when you're ready is if you can't keep the person safe, if you can't meet the physical demands, if you can't meet your other obligations in life.
Mm-hmm.
Often incontinence is the trigger to these things.
And I love that because you have a section in here, when is it time? Or, you know,
Yeah.
so helpful.
I think this kind of dialogue is very helpful because thinking about it, if ever had to go in, put me in. I'm ready.
Well, can we finish this first and then I can drive you over? Just,
Well,
if that's
one other thing I'll just say about that, I mean, that's a very positive attitude that you may or may not maintain. But as Tom was alluding to before, there are many kinds of long-term care facilities.
Yes.
There are some that are nursing home level of care. Those are medical care facilities. Often people are moved into those facilities when they have an acute medical need that requires rehabilitation. But there are people who stay there throughout their lives, many of whom have dementia. And the situation in those facilities may not be as amenable to a better quality of life like some of these memory care facilities that are designed at the assisted living level of care, meals, activities, etc. But the medical infrastructure is not there. And so when you're looking at different levels of care, it's really important that you understand what your loved one's going to get and what they're not going to get, and what you might still need to provide for them. And the example that I often give is, so I've been a consulting psychiatrist in an assisted living memory care facility of some kind or another for almost the past 30 years. I go to one now that I've been going to for 14 years, once a month. On a Saturday, I see patients, I meet with the staff, I meet with the families. That's an unusual situation. Not every memory care facility has an expert in dementia care going there to see people who are living there to help them navigate some of these behavioral challenges
great.
like anxiety and depression and agitation that occur, or having a primary care nurse practitioner or PCP even go into these facilities to provide care. Some have it, and you may want to ask about that ahead of time. We go through all this in the book. All I'm saying is that if you've seen one of these facilities, you've seen one of these facilities.
Good
And
point.
you really have to understand what they have to offer, because often there's a mismatch between the family's expectations of what they're offering and what the person really needs.
Such a good point.
Gotcha.
You know, Dr. Forester, I was just thinking about this when y'all were speaking earlier. I've brought in help for my mother, full-time help, or almost full-time. And my mother stays at home and they're there with her and they'll occasionally take her to the park. But my mother was such a social character. She loved playing cards and she loved being around people. I can't offer her that at home. And I honestly think that, and maybe it was me I had to get over, and I'm getting over, not had to get over, I'm in the process. This may have helped just a little bit, but I'm not doing her any favors, you know, by keeping her at home and keeping her away from other folks, you know, where she could have maybe more stimulation going to a facility, you know, and just so many more options and so much more care than just someone coming in and sitting with her or taking her to the park.
Yeah. And Tom, I'm sure you have some perspective on this socialization aspect.
Absolutely. And I think that, you know, as a larger point, and we talk about this in the book, but you almost never hear it talked about, is that moving to a memory care facility is a huge transition for the person who's moving to the facility, right? But it's also a huge transition for the family because you're going from 24/7 care for the person
Right.
to not having that, to having them being someplace else. And however difficult and stressful and hard it is, it becomes who you are, it becomes your identity, and you sort of lose your identity in that process. And the other thing is that you go from being in charge to being on someone else's turf, to have somebody else set the meal times and set all these things, and it's done their way. And so it's a huge transition for the family member too. And that's often a very difficult, emotionally fraught transition. And it's something that you need to take time to process and to work through and to cope with. And many people, one of the reasons they hesitate to make this transition, even when it's needed, is because it's so hard for the family member themselves.
Right. And you focus that, y'all are so considerate of that in the book. And you talk about the folks like me who are in that situation and how it's difficult. And so, I don't know, it's another reason why I love the book.
Well, my father had dementia due to cardiovascular reasons. And I brought him to live with me. He was out of state, and he moved in and lived at my house with me for about 8 or 9 months. And he loved my dogs, but he sat in the recliner and he watched TV and loved on my dogs all day. And he had always been a helper, and so he wanted to help me. And the laundry was downstairs in the basement, and one day he fell, and he laid there for 3 or 4 hours till I got home from work. And I was mortified that had happened to him, and he didn't have his phone on him. He had left it up by the recliner. And so, and I was just mortified, and he did have health problems. And so he went into the hospital for some health problems, and I realized he needs more than I can give him.
Yeah.
And so we researched it and found a great assisted living. It didn't need to be a safety locked facility yet. They did have that there, though, if he needed to move into that area of the assisted living facility. He had always been so incredibly social. Within 2 weeks, he had a girlfriend. He was going on all these he'd get on the little bus and go on all these little field trips. He'd tell me what they'd done that day, and he just loved it. And it was, I had this peace of mind that he was safe. And so I just think that sometimes you have to just trust that they're going to get more of what they need.
Plus, what I took away from this is he went in and he got himself a girlfriend. So I'm watching you, Bob.
Watch your mom.
He was single. He was absolutely single. So,
if I could just make one quick comment on that, it sounds like you transitioned him at the right time. It's very, very common when someone transitions to a care facility that they will have a decline, that their symptoms will worsen. And that's temporary, but it's normal. And it's also very common that they will have a lot of complaints. The food's bad. They stole my sweater. They lost this. They're not nice. Which is, you don't want to completely write it off, but it's very often a way of expressing that they're unhappy and confused. And that is very common, and that's very normal, and it's temporary. And it usually works out great after a while, but there is that brief dip usually when they go. Now, not always. In the case, it sounds like it was
my
great.
Dad hit the ground running.
But the reason I say you transition him at the right time is that the sooner you do it, the easier it is, the better a transition will usually be. The longer you wait, the harder it is, and the more you have that temporary decline. So that's another reason why people tend to wait too long. Yeah. And it makes it actually much harder for their loved one to make the transition.
So before we let you go, quick question. What are some things that people need to keep in mind that maybe indicate it's time to look for a place? What would you say that they should be looking for?
You could say what it is about them, but it's often more about you, the family caregiver. Can you keep them safe? Can you keep them? Can you give them what they need? Can you handle the physical demands of it? Can you meet your other obligations in life? Can you do your work, your job, take care of your other family members? often it's not a specific change in the person. It's can you meet that person's needs, or are their needs so much that they can't be taken care of by you and they need to be taken care of by another facility. So I think it's not so much what to look for in them. It's are their needs such that you can't meet them? But yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, I would just add, I agree with all of that. And it's such an individualized decision. There are different features about what makes sense for one person versus another. And a lot of that, as Tom said, has to do with what the family can handle. But because it's such a challenging decision, what I often encourage people to do is to make sure they can talk this through with a professional. Someone who is expert in navigating this journey with families. And the place to turn for essentially a free, amazing consultation is the local chapter of the Alzheimer's Association. And we put that in the book too. I mean, the Dementia Care Consultation Program is available almost everywhere in our country through their 1-800 hotline. And a social worker or some other trained clinician can meet with the family to talk this through. Does this make sense? Talk through the feelings so that people are feeling like they're on the same page. What I see happen in families often is there's a disagreement amongst siblings or between the parent and the adult children about what to do. And you need a coach or a therapist to help guide you through those decisions. You will feel much better about the decision when everyone is on the same page.
Great advice.
Great advice.
Really, thank you. And I know you guys, you're on a schedule and you've been so kind to give us so much of your time today. Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you'll join us again.
We would love to. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye.